Follow the Path. The Bears Grove is adult-level discussion of role-playing as a storytelling art at samchuppmedia.com. Hello and welcome again to the Bears Grove podcast. I am Sam Chupp, your podcaster. Today on the program, this is going to be World Building Wednesday. Okay, so it's a Wednesday, and I really am interested in talking about world building today. World building is a very difficult process. If you are not basing the world on our world here, or if you're not taking one of the published worlds that, say Wizards of the Coast publishes, or Cobalt Press, or anybody else who does, who's already created worlds for you to already use. If you're going to start with your own concept, it does take a lot of work. And I have always been a fan of the idea of fractally creating worlds. And when I say fractally, I may be using the word wrong, I don't know for certain, but the way I see it is the more attention you pay to a specific area, the more detail that area gets. And the further you go as a sort of zoom in on those aspects of the world, that's when those aspects get filled out. So instead of having to create every culture in a world, you create one central culture and maybe a couple of others in big, rough tones, very outline-oriented kind of cultures. And then you focus in on the culture, your focus culture, and eventually you may have your players, they may go to one of these other cultures, and then you can, interact with them, or they may run across that culture in another city. The way cities work, typically they have districts, and if there's multiple cultures, there's probably going to be districts in those cities where those people hang out, right? So that's the idea behind, my idea behind design for world building. Create things as a structure framework and then fill it in the more you pay attention to certain areas. So how do we do this? Where do we start? A lot of people, because of the way Tolkien is, start with the whole creator myth, the way, the mythology of the creation of the world, and so on. And that's easy enough done. It is a little bit, to my mind, it leaves everything a bit structured for my taste. I want there to be mystery. I want there to be things that, room left to grow in the direction of the past. I don't want to define everything from the moment the world came into being, because then you're not giving yourself any extra room. That's the problem with that concept. Okay. So I'm not a big fan of the start with mythology first practice. I am a fan of the idea of focusing down on something specific and using that something specific as a trellis to hang the rest of the campaign on, the milieu. For example, you could do it, Tolkien did it with languages, as well as the mythology, but you could do it with, today I want to talk about, you could do it with food. Food is vital. It's necessary. It really literally determines whether people live or die. And the variety of food in one's life is frequently pointed to as a health generating aspect, and also a good life creating situation. Like, for example, if all you have to eat is gruel all day long, every day, food is not an important thing for you. And so it's not going to drive, you to do things to get that food. You just want to, you have the food, you eat it, big deal, whatever, it's gruel. It's this paste that I eat. And I don't like that. I personally am not a big fan of eating paste. I think if you think about the way human food is in our world, you've got several different kinds of protein, meat and vegetable protein. You've got carbohydrates. You've got vegetables. You've got fiber. You've got starches. Okay? All of those different aspects. You've got spices. You've got flavorings. You've got fruits. All of those different categories are there as a structure for you to fill in the blanks. When you think about these, I want you to think about how each of those is obtained. Because as soon as you involve people, I'm not necessarily saying humans, but people, in the process of creating food, then what you're doing is you're involving the people of your world. And those structures, those food generating people are going to then, imply other kinds of people. You have to answer questions about food in your setting. Is it polite to eat in front of someone? What is the etiquette about when someone feeds you? What do you do? There's, is cooking seen as a thing that only one type of person can do? Those sort of things cause, you to look at the culture a specific way. Food takes a lot of time to create. There are legends of hunter-gatherer societies that lived in abundance. They would be like, they just basically ate whatever fell off the trees and whatever nuts and berries they could find, and that was okay with them, and they didn't really mind, and isn't that wonderful? Well, that's, an idealized situation. I don't think that, you can make that a life plan. So it takes a long time to create food, a lot of energy to create food, a lot of effort. It takes some luck. It takes some knowledge. It takes some experience with the weather, the wind, the rain, the sun. And this is how you can create a backbone upon which to hang the rest of your milieu. Okay? You'd say, well, these people eat mostly meat. And they have 3 animals that they farm. And they have 2 animals they hunt. And, it's this animal specifically is seen as a poor person's animal. And this one is supposedly just for old people because it'll help them survive. And this one over here, this one is for warriors. If they don't get this particular meat, they're going to be offended. And then you have situations like, religions that come in and they say, wait a second, to eat of the fruit of that, to eat of the offspring of the warrior beast is anathema. We don't want to do anything with that. We don't want to touch it. It's unclean. So at that point, there's a religious aspect of food that you have to look at. There's also government. It may be that because this meal, this particular kind of herd animal is only fed to warriors, well, that basically you'll see kingdoms getting together, governments getting together and saying, we need to control the access to this food because we don't want just anybody creating creating warriors. We don't want our enemies growing up big and strong where we cannot. So we have to keep a supply of these animals around and keep them alive because we need to be able to eat this food, right? Now, whether or not that actually holds true, that if you don't get this particular meat to eat, you're not going to be a warrior, I think is something that you can play with. But this is just how people see things. And I made a misstep just a second ago talking about wizards, but what if there was a kind of fruit or a kind of tomato, a kind of plant, a kind of vegetable of some kind that only wizards can eat? And in fact, it's poisonous to everybody else. So what could happen is, in a situation where magic is getting persecuted, you could just have this jar of this wizard bane jelly and walk around and make people taste it if they're suspected to be a wizard. If they like it, if they obviously don't get sick from it, then they're a wizard. And that could expose somebody to persecution, to death, be put to the sword because you're an unlicensed, unregulated wizard. So there's a lot of different methods you can use to tie food into your scenario. The main issue with food, though, is that generating food, except for perhaps maybe hunting, creating food is typically seen as a peasant's job, and that takes place in the fields, not in a dungeon. So if you have a fantasy game and you are keeping to the fantasy tropes, what you're having there is a situation where your players are really not the people who would be making this food, right? They're the people who go into the dungeons, they go adventuring, they create money that way, and then they come back to the village and they pay for their food. But they're not seen as generators of food, unless, of course, they're hunters, in which case they can hunt these animals and come back with them and maybe be seen as saviors of the village. The point I'm trying to make here, and I do have one, is that you might say to me, Sam, food is not a big of a deal in the game. Like, I have iron rations, you just check them off. No big. Well, that's true for you, and it may not be important to you. But if you want that sense of a world that you're living in, it's important for you to create a structure and a framework so that everything makes sense. And the more things that make sense, the more enmeshed and immersed your players are going to be. And that's what I'm trying to, get you to think about. Now, it's true that there's some games that don't even have a cooking skill. I encourage you to create one. Offer it as just a regular skill, or maybe it's a feat, or maybe it's a character class who cooks as well. Like alchemists all know how to cook, or rangers know how to prepare, campfire meals just by default. So just think about all these things for me. I'd love to hear what you think about this idea. And I'd also like to point you to a Patreon by Vincent Baker and Megway Baker. I may not be saying the name right. I got the idea for this podcast from an article that Meg wrote talking about threads and textiles. And I heartily encourage you to go to that Patreon, sign up for it, and read that article. It's an amazing concept of yet another way we could define a campaign or world, or a game world, by first thinking about textiles. Okay? So have a thought about that. Take a look. The URLs will be in the show notes. I'd like to thank everybody who purchased books over the Black Friday, Cyber Monday sale. I really appreciate your support. I'm hoping that in the very near future, we'll be able to get you a new game. Sidekids is coming out, and I'm looking forward to that. You will know about it as soon as I get it done. It's right now at 30,000 words. Of course, some of those words are going to be cut, but I'm looking forward to how this is received and if people play it. And I'd love to see, I'd love to hear stories about how people play the games that I create. So thanks so much. And I hope you rest well tonight, and sweet dreams when you get them. Bye-bye.